Hello. Hello, Christy.
Hi,
Thank you for
Maria.
joining us. Hi, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. I'm good, thank you. And a happy belated Thanksgiving.
Thank you very
Um,
much.
did you have a lovely time?
It was wonderful. Friends, food, drink, relaxing. It was great.
Today's session, we are going to be talking about tax requirements, specifically for UK recruitment and staffing businesses when doing business in the US. Christy, you have been a great support with PGC and to a number of our clients. So we thought there's no better guest to have on and to share your expertise. So thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
No, thank you. Before we jump in, it would be great if you're happy to just share a little bit about your experience about Dyke Yaxley and how you support your clients.
Sure. We are a US UK transatlantic cross-border accountancy firm. We have a niche where this is the only treaty that we handle and look at. And we work with PGC and business clients as they are endeavoring to expand into the US. So whether they are remaining as a UK entity that is starting to work with US clients or taking the leap and expanding into the US, we take a holistic approach to helping those who are doing so because their expansion goes even far beyond just taxation and compliance, the payroll requirements, healthcare, what is workers' comp, how do you get a tax ID number, how do you get a bank account? So those are the things that we try to help our clients navigate.
Perfect. And a lot of those points we'll be diving into today in the next 30 minutes. So if anyone that has joined us has any specific questions, there is a comment box. So please feel free to utilize those and we will try and get through as many of your comments as possible. But I know myself and Chrissy will be very happy to answer any questions that we don't get through today. So just to kick it off, and I guess as a great starting point, from your opinion, what advice would you give to companies, obviously specifically UK recruitment companies who are considering doing business in the US from the UK?
The best thing to do is to talk to an advisor so that you make sure you're compliant.
Yeah.
It's important to understand that legal lawyers don't give tax advice and accountants don't give legal advice. So from a taxation perspective, it is very good to understand the difference between placing a perm placement versus placing a contract placement, how contractors are paid, what the compliance looks like, not only on a federal level, but on a state-by-state level. And the great news is a UK recruitment firm can very easily do business with the US, remaining compliant without too much hassle, and proceed from there and have great success in the US.
And in terms of the tax requirements, then, when making placements, how would it differ or how would it even work if I were a perm recruiter placing a permanent candidate into the US from my UK company, limited company, from my UK office? On the perm side, what would my tax requirements in the US look like?
Very little, actually. If you do not have a permanent establishment or a physical connection to the US, on a federal level, the IRS does not look at you as though you have a tax issue or a tax compliance matter. The complexity comes from the 50 separate states. Since 2018, the Supreme Court made a decision that has allowed states the autonomy to set economic thresholds that require for certain things, for certain taxes. We have layers of tax. So there is the sales tax, which relates to your VAT, and there is also some corporation tax. So from a tax compliance view, federal, you don't really have to worry about it, but it would be really great to track your sales by state. That's where you think the state is benefiting from that placement, because there could be potential compliance matters.
When we say tracking, the sales in each state, is that where the client has got, their invoicing address or headquarters, not where you're necessarily placing the candidate into?
That's an interesting question. We wish we had 100% clarity on it. But with perm placements, you don't always know where the perm placement is going to be. You're working with a large company. They have locations all throughout the US. You could be placing someone who is going to work remotely, and you know that from a certain state. So you don't have to be a detective, is what I tell clients, but to the best of your ability, wherever that candidate is working is the place you should track that client or track that sale, that turnover. If you do not know or aren't quite sure, then you fall back to where you are invoicing.
Perfect. And you mentioned the certain thresholds in each state. Does that sales tax apply to every state? Are there a certain number of states?
Great question. So for sales tax, or our version of VAT, because it's not national, there are only 5 states currently that charge sales tax on recruitment services. I'll list them briefly: Washington, D.C., Connecticut, West Virginia, Iowa, and Pennsylvania. But the scene of the world is always changing, especially after the pandemic and all the relief monies that went out. States are looking for new streams of revenue. Yeah. So we do expect some of those rules to change. The other tax is a form of corporation tax. It's called a franchise tax, an excise tax, a commercial activities tax, depending on the state. There are currently 10 states that have an economic threshold for those taxes that could be due if you cross the threshold in that state. And if I can be clairvoyant and think what your next question might be, is what are those thresholds? They vary state to state. Some states are 500,000, some are 200. But the rule of thumb we always let our clients know is if you're reaching $100,000 in turnover in a particular location, it's great to check the rules of that particular state to see, one, you're free and clear. There's nothing that's going to bring you compliance issues, or you may have a compliance issue and you may want to talk to an expert about that.
Fantastic. Thank you. And just to touch on quickly the contract side then, when making contract placements into the US, obviously there are different types of contractors in the US. Any of those watching that would like to dive into a little more detail on those, I'd be very happy to run through those. But just as a high level, taxation requirements when making contract placements into the US.
Yes. So there's 2 different ways to pay a contractor. One is via PAYE or W-2, we call it here, or what's called a 1099, which is where the contractor is paid directly from the recruitment firm. There's where the danger lies. There's a danger in both, in that once you start paying someone to do work on U.S. soil or within the U.S., you now are crossing the line of establishing this permanent establishment and having many compliance matters. On the 1099 basis, it's another whole discussion about what is an LLC, which I think would have to be a separate discussion. Yeah. But this entity that people can create in the U.S. doesn't mean that they're a business. So there's a danger in thinking it's a B2B transaction. If they're okay being on a PAYE or W-2, the best thing to do is to use PGC, an employer of record, because I bring up, I know you charge it. We're all in the profit-making business. There's a fee attached to your services. But if that fee isn't paid to you, then the recruitment firm will have tax compliance matters. They'll have to legally register in a state, file on a federal and state level, and comply with payroll tax rules. Then they'll also have some things like workers' compensation. And how do they provide health care and pension is another story. So when it comes to contract workers, to sum it up, avoid paying anyone directly.
Yeah.
And if you do want to get into the contract business, it really is good to get your feet wet with working with an employer of record.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to add to that, just fully knowing, misclassifications of contract workers and the risks involved in the US are very different to those of the UK. So having a full understanding of that, again, of which we can help with. And just finally on the tax requirements. So a lot of our clients might say, okay, so when I am invoicing a fee, let's say a perm introductory fee, am I to put any VAT on that? How am I invoicing US dollars? You know, what's the best kind of rule of thumb when invoicing?
So a few key things about invoices. Let me start with the look of the invoice. We don't have registered addresses in the US. You have no need to put any VAT number on your invoice. If it's there, that's fine. Your clients, I'm sure, are going to want you to invoice in US dollars, most likely. Yeah. If you do not set up a US bank account, which is fine, you have a US dollar account. If your client is willing to pay you that way, it's a wire transfer for US companies, but that's great. But you don't need to have any of those required items. Whether or not you put VAT on the invoice, from a US tax perspective, it's not required. But I don't give out UK tax advice. Yeah. So it's best to ask your UK accountant if you're across the threshold, is it something you need to consider from a UK standpoint? But from a US standpoint, you do not have to add VAT. If you cross the threshold in one of those 5 states, you potentially may have to charge US sales tax. But again, that's potentially, and that's something that should be discussed on a one-by-one, case-by-case, state-by-state basis.
Perfect. And I think that leads us really nicely on to talk about your W8 Benny. I always call it a W8 BENE form, but I heard you mention W8 BENE form. So just to explain, just to anyone who's on the call that doesn't know what that form is, it would be great just to hear from you an explanation of that.
Sure. So there's 2 forms. There's a domestic form in the US called a W9. It's simply informational. It's where a domestic US company provides another US company with their legal name, address, tax entity type, and their tax ID number. And it's simply informational. When you're not a US entity, the US has the onus, US company has the onus of withholding federal tax from a payment to a foreign entity if it's necessary to do so. The W8 BENE form lets the UK firm, lets their US client know they do not have a permanent establishment in the US. They recognize all profits in the United Kingdom, and then there doesn't have to be a federal withholding taken from any payments that are then issued to the UK entity. It's simply that. It's a form that's long and looks intimidating, but it really isn't once you understand it. It does require some treaty language because you have to quote the parts of the treaty where you're recognizing your business profits in the UK. And what the client does with that form is they put it in a file and they never look at it again.
So I would be right in saying that it is usually your end client that would be asking you to fill out your W8 BENE.
Yes, and it has to do with US federal withholding tax or income tax. It just proves that you do not have any requirement to pay the US government any tax.
Yeah. And if your US client didn't send you one or didn't ask you to fill out one, do you have a responsibility to send and share one? Do you need to ask for one?
Absolutely not. I always recommend to clients that you wait until you're asked for it. If you don't, you could be sending a form over to a procurement department within a company that doesn't understand it, and it may cause more questions and confusion. So if it's asked for, absolutely, but don't volunteer it.
And are there timelines of how quickly you need to fill this out? At what stage of the process will you be asked for the W8 form? And also, timelines of when you might need to have had that filled out and sent back.
Sure. Most US companies won't pay you until they have it. So if they ask for it, the sooner you can return it to them, then it won't hold up the payment to you. Generally, I see that it's asked for during the procurement process, where you're providing all of the various bits of information that the procurement department needs to have from you, your terms, your name, your address, your banking information, and they'll generally ask for it then.
Perfect. And just one last question on the forms. So you've mentioned, and I've seen them myself, they can be, quite complex and lengthy. Should recruiters, need support filling this out, need some advice filling out the form, obviously seek, expert help. Is that something that they can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. And it's not to be transparent. We don't charge anything to give out that sort of advice. We do need to have a conversation to understand the transaction, to ensure that we're not providing written advice incorrectly. Once I have a conversation with someone who needs to complete the form and we understand the transaction fits the form, then I can provide all the language that you need and the boxes that you need to tick on that form.
Fantastic. Thank you. And then next, I just wanted to touch on tax ID numbers. So this is something that comes up a lot, usually when our clients have had conversations with their end clients and end clients are asking them for tax ID numbers. So I guess just to kick this section off, what is a tax ID number in the US?
It's the same thing as your HMRC identifier in the UK. So the IRS issues what's called an EIN or FEIN, Federal Tax Identification Number, and it's 9 digits, and it's what your US identifier is. What you do not have to have on the W-8BENE form is a tax ID number. The US client, the end user, may not understand that. There's a spot for it on the form, and that's if you have one. But you do not have to have one in order to complete the W-8BENE form. You do not want to get a U.S. tax identification number or identifier unless you truly need one, because then now the IRS knows about you.
Yeah.
You could have some filing, maybe not tax payment requirements, but some filing requirements on a federal level.
And that's your EIN number would be something you receive once you've incorporated, registered, mm-hmm. So you remain kind of as an alien business. I know we've referred to it before.
Yes. And there are reasons that a foreign entity does have a US EIN. There are definitely situations and scenarios where they do. But just to be a UK recruitment firm that's making placements into the USA, you do not have to have a tax identification number.
Fantastic. Fab. And just in terms from your experience from a tax perspective, what have you seen be some common mistakes that UK recruiters have maybe made, or, top tips of mistakes to avoid from your experience when you've had clients kind of enter the market? I know sometimes you get clients that, are too late when they come to you and say, oh, we've been doing it for this many years and we've not been tracking our thresholds. What would your advice be?
Well, first, again, it's to go back to make sure you speak to some experts or some advisors. It's good to get a legal perspective because of terms and conditions and different things like that. I've been on enough of these calls that I understand that that's very important. But lawyers don't give tax advice. And so the same thing as accountants. I won't give you legal advice, but we'll let you know what the pitfalls could be from an accountancy perspective. If you are setting up in the US, it's very important that you do the homework and research about where you would like to set up. I recently heard one of our clients on a LinkedIn episode comment that if they had to do something different, they probably would have not just settled on the one location where they are because of the expense and the taxation. So where's your talent pool? What are the tax rules in that state and that area? How expensive is it? What are your options? Time zones, direct flights, all those things. So that's something that, even though it's not taxation, we see a lot of successful recruitment firms really studying. The other thing I would say is not stay away from Google. It's okay to use it to get an understanding of what terminology is, but you can spend a lot of time doing research and not get an accurate picture, whereas you can speak to certain advisors that, like us and some others that we all know in common on the legal side, et cetera, that are happy to give some initial advice and some guidance to help out with that.
Yeah.
The other thing, the complexity of the 50 states, please remember that. You cannot move around freely in the US like you can in the UK without some, I don't want to use negative words, so let's just say without some compliance matters that are going to come up and potential tax matters. It's okay. The complexity is fine. It's a great market. People are very successful here, but make sure that you have a good understanding of what those requirements are, and don't do it on your own. The other thing is understanding paying contractors, which we've touched on. That's very, very important. And then also understanding the complexity that I'm going to use the word payroll as a general term. Not only payroll tax, healthcare, pension, workers' compensation, understanding the complexity of those things will help make a good decision on how you want to move forward with placing contractors. So I would say those are the high points of that we would talk to clients about to make sure they have a full understanding of those items before embarking.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. We've had conversations with clients that perhaps hadn't really fully understood, the different state, taxes, business taxes, income tax for their employees, and maybe they've gone to a more expensive state for business tax like New York, and then they've realized, we don't even have our main hub of clients in New York, but we're paying the highest business tax, or one of the highest in the US.
To sum that up with each state, the key thing to remember is every state has autonomy to pass their own tax rules and other regulations as long as they don't supersede federal rules. So the sales tax rate is different in every state. Some states have multiple rates within the state. Each one of the 50 states is able to set their own corporation tax rates and rules. That's the key thing to understand about the 50 states, is that they do operate almost like 50 separate countries or 50 separate entities.
And if a recruiter were to ask you, Christy, what are some states I should probably look at from a tax efficient point of view, would there be a few you would, highlight to them to
Sure.
explore?
Absolutely. The U.S. is very regional. So there are expensive parts of the U.S. The Northeast is always going to be more expensive. The West Coast is always going to be a little bit more expensive. But there are certain states that don't have an individual income withholding tax. They will still have a corporation franchise type tax. And also the cost of living is less. And the municipal, which we get down to the city level of taxes, don't exist in certain states. So we are seeing clients right now looking at Florida, Texas, the Carolinas, Tennessee is starting to be looked at. For servicing the West Coast, people are looking at Arizona, and also the Midwest area of the United States. So the Great Lakes region, when you look at that part of the map and see all that water in the upper center, those states surrounding are generally affordable, don't have harsh tax regimes, have good connectability to the U.S. and are in good time zones. So yes, there's many states that people are shying away from the pre-pandemic, let's go to New York and let's go to California. Yeah,
definitely. We've seen that too, especially with even talent taking advantage of personal income tax as well. Fab. Well, we have flown through. I just have two questions that have come in. I think this first one will be a fairly quick one. Someone has asked, what is it referred to when someone talks about creating a nexus or a tax nexus?
Great question. A nexus means connection. So You have two ways to connect to within the US, which is physical is the first. And speaking with recruitment, it would mean paying an agent or a contractor directly, hiring someone, incorporating, setting up an office. Then the next is economic connection. And that's where these thresholds are set. And when you reach that threshold of turnover, it's not profit, it's turnover, then you can potentially create a connection to that state that then will require compliance.
Perfect. And the likes of perhaps getting kind of a PO box or a US dollars account or number, that's not a physical nexus that they're creating?
Yeah, through the pandemic and what we've come across in research, we've taken the position that the virtual address, the virtual office, getting a US telephone number does not create that nexus. Opening a US bank account does. Having a US dollar account through an FX company or in the UK does not.
Okay, perfect. That's super useful. And the last question that we've had come through would be, how much revenue would a company, UK recruitment company, be generating from the UK before perhaps it should start looking at incorporating or registering for from a tax perspective?
That's another great question. The revenue has nothing to do with it. We know clients who have only worked out of their UK business and been very successful in the US without setting up a US entity. What you really have to look at first is the physicality. Do you want feet on the ground in the US that represent you? Then you likely need a US entity. Does your client want to work with, and I would use air quotes if I wasn't on a delay, a US entity? Some only want to buy from the USA. So they'll say for optics, you need to have an US incorporated business if you open a bank account in the USA. So really look at those physical things first. If you want to get a visa process going and send people to the US, of course, then you need a US entity. But if you would like to continue to operate out of the UK, you do all the work in the UK. Your contract is considered signed in the UK and you're making placements in the US, there's nothing stopping you from continuing to do that.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think we just had a question through from Joseph that we've actually touched on a little bit there. So when it seems so simple to do this from the UK, what are the main benefits of actually setting up in the US? And I mean, you've touched on, having boots on the ground, like actually having people on the ground to, have that presence of the market if you're wanting to get visas, expand across the US and really build that American business. But absolutely, you really can build amazing business and services in the US from the UK.
And the only other reason, just to, again, I'm repeating myself, but to add on to that is, if your client says, I need to work with a US company, they won't look at the ownership of that US company. And so sometimes it's the optics, and that's where it's a business decision. Is it worth it?
Yeah.
For your business, is that client, do you want to satisfy their needs by opening a US entity that you can still run from the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that has absolutely flown by. I think we've already gone over by a minute, so apologies. But Christy, thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed this.
Good. Oh, I'm glad. Well, anyone who's been watching that you have any questions or would like to reach out to either of us, please do, send us a message, send us a connection on LinkedIn, and we would be delighted to carry on the conversation.
Have a great day.
Thanks all.